Following is the conversation with S Anand, the CEO and co-founder of Gramener Technologies. He is recognized as one of India's leading data scientists and is very well known for his exceptional ability to narrate stories through data. Yeah, yeah. And so for me, I want to just get started with NLP podcast. So I thought I will take some questions like people that generally ask whenever I go for trainings, as well as when I meet people for NLP consulting as well, right? So some
Hmm.
questions keep coming on and off. So I thought I will
Mhm.
ask similar questions to multiple people and get their opinion as well as from
Sure.
different sectors. So I'm also planning to talk with other people in universities and healthcare system, etc. and all. So and then generally get the idea what is the impact of these LLMs that are coming up, proprietary as well as open source LLMs, and how they are impacting one on the company side as well as on the individuals like data scientists or people who are constantly working in this particular field. So
Okay.
that is the idea for the podcast that I'm trying to do. So I will start with a few questions, and then maybe as we move on, we will get with the other parts as well. First, I
Absolutely.
want to understand your opinion and your experience with these LLMs.
It feels like an alien life form.
Okay.
It's almost like an alien has come, given us some technology without a user manual, and we are having to pod into that. On the one hand, it is supremely capable, and therefore it is surprising.
Okay.
That it seems to be intelligent is very surprising. On the other hand, there are so many things that we don't know, and the set of things that we don't know is increasing uh, just as fast. Simply, for example, the way in which we control these is non-deterministic.
True.
The same input does not give you the same output. And the ways in which they come up with the results are also non-trivial. For example, just asking a question and then prompting again, asking, are you sure? Now, when you say, are you sure? Quite often it comes up with, no, I'm not
Hmm.
sure, and
True.
changes its response. And where does that behavior come from? So the biggest change that I've had to make in my mental model is moving away from computers as deterministic to computers as non-deterministic, which I found easier when I stopped thinking of LLMs as machines, but rather as humans or aliens that we just don't understand. And when that happens, the I mean, that is probably reflective of the sheer power of the technology that we have. So, in my opinion, LLMs are the biggest technological revolution that I've seen since, I guess, Google.
Okay. On the point that you mentioned about the reproducibility, right? So even we also face for every question that we ask, you almost get the same context, but let's say in different paraphrases and all. Let's take certain examples. Like I ask for a certain score. Let's say I do a sentiment analysis with these LLMs. I give some passage and say, can you measure the positivity in this particular sentence? And if this score becomes a kind of random, not I would say exactly fully random, but let's say instead of 85, it gives 88 or 90, something like that. How should we get a final output? Should we do it multiple times and then take an average out of it, or what would be your way when it gives multiple types of outputs?
I, like I mentioned, I've stopped thinking of LLMs as programs and
Okay,
rather as people. So the question translates to when I ask the same question to different people for a score, I get different scores.
okay,
How should I treat it? And yes, as you said, one way is to take an average. Another way is to do a statistical survey, like an exit poll, not an exit poll, more like a poll. So one of the ways in which people do that is to say India comprises of, let's say, three demographic groups. Group A is 20%, Group B is 30%, Group C is 50%. So I will take one person from each demographic and weight the result by 20, 30, 50.
Okay.
That could be
Okay.
another way of thinking about it. But the fact that the results are different in different contexts is also partly of a reflection of some of the questions that we pose to it being non-deterministic. What do I mean by that? Humans are the ones that are defining these.
Hmm. Hmm.
If I ask the question, what is uh, 70% good plus 40% green? The question is meaningless. But if push comes to shove, a human might answer something like a field of grass.
Hmm.
Now, another person might answer something completely different, and an LLM might answer something completely different. And the question largely becomes what constitutes correct?
Hmm. Hmm.
And one way of solving that problem is to say, for a well-defined question, averages or medians are a good way. But that's not the only
Hmm.
approach. Sometimes you're saying, I need to frame the question better or differently to reduce ambiguity. That's another approach, which is crafting the study. I need to sample better. That is another approach. I need to prime the question better by providing a pre-question. Put another way, the fact that answers are different in different circumstances is partly also because the answers are fundamentally different. And all of the techniques that we use to deal with ambiguity with humans apply here as well.
Supply chain as well. Okay, 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 got it. But did you get any chance with the recent projects in Gramener to work with LLMs?
There are currently, I think, 4 applications in production and 18 pilots ongoing. That is the
Okay,
speed at which things are running.
okay, okay. And you also trying like experimenting with the open source LLMs, or is it like mostly with the OpenAI calls?
For generation, it's more OpenAI or Azure OpenAI,
Okay,
where people want it within the environment. And where it comes to embeddings, there we are using open models, E5 from Microsoft being an example. They tend to perform at least as well, if not better in some cases than OpenAI's embedding models.
okay. And while you choose these open source models, do you start with the lower ones? Meaning, when I say lower ones, the weights, right? Let's say Llama, you do you start with 7B or directly jump into 70B kind of thing?
When evaluating, we are looking at the highest models because
Okay,
we want to know what's capable, what's possible. When testing and prototyping, we use the lower end models to reduce the cost and the computational effort. When uh, testing and in production, we go back to the highest end models because everyone wants the best quality.
okay, okay, okay.
But
But that also,
we haven't yet gone into production with any of the local models yet,
okay,
tested in
okay,
pilot.
okay, okay. And any luck with small LLMs? Did you
Um,
try?
Uh, yes and no. They do not stand on their own. The quality of output that people expect and have become used to with
Hmm,
ChatGPT
hmm,
is not something that they can deliver. But they are pretty good at uh, internal tasks. If we set up an agent, for example, supposing we wanted to improve the quality of the question a user asks in a chatbot, there we could use a lower end LLM and prompt it to add a set of things to the question.
okay.
If you wanted to do some kinds of extraction where it's reasonably safe or
Hmm,
function
hmm.
calling where it's reasonably safe, there it makes sense. If you want to do something specialized, like let's say write SQL, then SQL Coder as a model is a reasonably good choice. So those kinds of niche tasks, especially where they are intermediate, local models are the lower end local models work fine, but not for the final generation or a, a generalized task.
Okay, okay. And by any chance, did you get your hands dirty to understand how these works, at least a little bit, at least, or you're blindly going?
Absolutely not. As far
Okay,
as I'm concerned, they're black boxes. Let them stay
fully
that
black. You
way.
don't want to make it even little bit gray. Okay, okay, okay,
Absolutely not.
okay. I also saw your recent articles on LLMs, and I guess you decided not to code anymore. So, So what will be the way forward for anyone who coming into this particular field, let's say data science in general, or let's take NLP. Should we only work with these LLMs, and is that the way forward? And only being a user, not being a person who, let's say, do a feature engineering or play around with that. What is your opinion on that?
When I joined IBM in 96, I was really keen on writing compilers because as I was studying in college, that was the hot thing. Everybody was creating compilers. When I was on the train to Bangalore, the person who was sitting next to me, who incidentally had been in software for a few years, told me, Anand, look, how many people do you think will be writing compilers?
Hmm.
It made perfect sense. Today, it's the same thing. When modeling is in its infancy, there are a lot of people in the industry who are creating models. And the reason is because the industry is full of explorers, experimenters who are creating new stuff. Once it matures, the people that are using it tend to become larger in number, and that is the nature of every industry. For someone who is already in the industry and who's already doing modeling, it may make sense to continue because there is likely to be growth. For someone who's coming in now, I suspect that the majority of them will be part of the user community,
Okay.
unless somebody has a strong personal interest in modeling. And even then, as a proportion, there may not be that much of an opportunity to create models as there is to use models, which is not to say that creating models is not useful. It is not to say that creating models is difficult to achieve. I just think that the opportunities are more outside, that is in the usage, than in the creation.
Okay. Okay. Got it. So for someone, let's say, even to use it properly, forget about creating a new one or changing the existing one. For someone to enter into this LLM, so the requirements to run a very large machine with high-end GPUs, as well as the cost that is involved, is pretty high. So does it take us like only big corporates can afford this, even to play around? I'm talking to work on these large models.
No, ChatGPT costs a tiny fraction.
But let's say I want to run it locally. Let's say models like Llama, Think, and all. I don't want let's say as an individual, a small startup, they don't want to share their data with let's say OpenAI. They want to run it on their own premises. And the output could be not that good, let's say, but they want to progressively increase the value. But even to get started with these LLMs, pretty decent one. I'm not even talking about the higher end version of these LLMs. The requirements, especially from the GPU side, is pretty high. So, what would be your choice, or what is your suggestion for someone, let's say, small startup not having funding, individuals, let's say, like us, how should we proceed on that?
Use their cloud service. See, there's a corporate. They don't want their secrets to go out. There's a good chance that they're already storing their secrets somewhere. 99% it is likely to be on one of the three cloud platforms, Google, Amazon, or Azure. In which case, Azure has OpenAI, Google has Palm, and Amazon has Bedrock. So use those. And the pricing is fairly similar to these.
So you're talking about the API calls, right?
Correct.
Not hosting it internally in let's say in my cloud system, I want to just install Llama and then run it locally. So you don't suggest that.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
If you're saying, look, I absolutely have to do it, how can I do
Okay.
it cheaper? That's a different question. But if you're saying this is the problem that I want to solve is that I cannot use a public API and I want to reduce cost, then this is the way to do it because
Okay.
it's on a per request basis and for prototyping, the cost will not come to more than $5, $10 over a month of prototyping in all likelihood.
Okay.
Over and above that, if there is a need to actually run a local model, it's typically coming from a corporate that has strong enough a need for it, in which case, get funding.
Okay.
Ask
Okay.
them to provide the service.
Okay. Got it now. Sure. And I also want to want to ask. Did you get any chance to play around with these LLMs from a storytelling perspective or from data visualization especially?
Totally. How would I
Okay.
miss that? So
Okay.
lots of
Any good?
stories that,
Okay.
oh yeah, several. Where do I begin? No, let me share my screen.
Sure.
Is this an audio podcast or is this a video
No, no, it will
podcast?
be video also.
So let me share my screen. So one of the things that uh, we were playing around with was, could we potentially cluster content? So if I
Okay.
take the Gramener employee survey, for instance, which
Hmm.
I'll just, and ask the question, what works well at Gramener?
Okay.
And paste that column and cluster it and say, give me 10 clusters. So what that's done is created the embeddings around each of these and said, this is one cluster. There's a lot of freedom to experiment and learn at
Okay.
Gramener. There's a lot of good work-life balance at Gramener, which has incidentally changed over the last 5 years, by the way.
Okay.
Um, Collaboration and leadership team is another strong one, and so on. It goes on like this. So once we have these clusters, another thing that we can do, which incidentally is now disabled because I've been changing the API keys, is
Okay.
you can say this is freedom to experiment and learn. That's one good thing. We saw collaboration as
Okay.
another good thing, work, life balance as another. And I can put in my own set of topics and say categorize these into topics.
Okay.
Once you have that, which is what we incidentally did for Pepsi at Quaker Oats,
Okay.
we were looking at all of these public reviews of Quaker Oats from Amazon and exploring which categories they fall into, what topics they are about, and what drives their overall rating. So innovation, portability, and nutritional value are what people love about Quaker Oats.
Okay.
And what they like the least is the portion size, packaging, and the ingredients. So you can see the details of those.
Okay.
Now, this is also, and then of course you can start looking at how this is, how each of these are trending. So let's take portion size. Overall, gently trending upwards. It started low, but now at least it's a little better than it used to be. Texture has had a lot of variation and stuff like that. Now, one other interesting thing is that it's not just the data that's coming from LLMs. The entire code, 100% of this chart was written with
Okay.
ChatGPT.
Okay.
Not one line of code human edited.
Okay.
And that's one aspect of it. Another is we were looking at the, okay, let me log in here,
Yeah.
G20 documents. When the G20 summit happened, the Gates Foundation was curious to see which of the Gates Foundation goals the G20 was talking about. And here are their goals: multilateral development, finance reforms, climate, smart agriculture, science and innovation, health, etc. And this is how often each of these topics were mentioned in the G20 documents.
Okay.
Again, using topic modeling. Specifically within the sub-goals, this is how often the multilateral development finance sub-goals were mentioned. A lot less mention of IMF, a lot more about finance. Similarly, climate smart agriculture and each of these. Health is a pretty important area for them. But all that the G20 is talking about, what little they're talking about, is about COVID and pandemic prevention. There's practically no mention of health services, health finance, accessibility, R&D, and so on, which means that this is one area that the foundation needs to really push on. And then let's explore the document itself, and you'll find this fairly familiar
Yeah, with
to the Mahabharata example,
Mahabharata. Yeah, that is
right?
what I was thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah, which is exactly what they wanted. So we break
Okay.
the document into sub-documents, and within each of those there are sections, and within those there are paragraphs of which these are summaries. So you can ask which of the goals are mentioned where. So here's where multilateral development finance reforms are mentioned. Here's where climate smart agriculture is mentioned. Here's where all the topics are mentioned. And you can see which exactly are the sub-goals that are covered in a particular area. Now, the thing is, what constitutes a mention is subjective. Now, why are we saying that this is mentioning, for instance, agree value chain when there is no mention of the value chain here? And the answer is it's close enough. So what if I want to make it a little stricter and say, look, I only want the specific, sorry, I only want really specific mentions. In that case, you can increase the threshold or be more liberal about the threshold. at which point you can start looking at whether there are overlaps. So for instance, here is a mention of both health as well as climate smart agriculture. And that is one point of overlap. Here is a mention of multiple topics which are coming together. So which allows us to then explore a topic network. Can we, for instance, see which of these topics are tightly connected with which other topics because they co-occur. And we can see that digital economy is one of those that is highly connected, not just with its own areas, but also with
The
women
other.
economic power, digital public infrastructure, multilateral finance, and so on. Even at lower levels or higher thresholds, if you say, no, I only want tighter connectivity. And then you can start exploring which of the other topics start forming clusters. So science and innovation seems to be forming its own cluster independent of digital economy. And pandemic prevention seems to be forming a kind of cluster, but not strong enough a cluster. They tend to break apart fairly easily. Whereas something like multilateral development finance reforms, digital public infrastructure, they tend to stay together. And you can see, how well does a cluster stay together. And the one cluster that absolutely remains even after everything is digital public infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
So that's a very strong cohesive set of topics. And the only exception is development finance reforms and multilateral development banks are another set of topics that are very tightly connected. So we get to explore stories like this, and this is something that we are now converting into a generic product.
Okay, so here you give the text to these LLMs, and you first start asking for the topics, and then tag each of the sentences or words based on the topics, and then you do the backend processing, is it? Or
The backend processing is nothing more than embeddings.
okay, okay,
So we get the embeddings, we do a dot product of the embedding with the topic. That is the similarity.
okay, got it. So you get embeddings as well as topics from the LLMs. Am I right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Uh,
But sometimes the clients would want to change the topics based on an existing taxonomy or hierarchy they already have.
Okay, got it. So when you started getting these embeddings from the LLMs, right? Did you get any chance to play around with how good they are? Because when I tried with few of the embeddings, let's say I started asking what is the embedding for Apple and what is the embedding for Australia, let's say. Then I was trying to ask, is there any similarity? Because I took cosine similarity as a measure. And then I casually was looking at the results. It was saying around zero point 0.8 or zero point 0.9 is the similarity between these two words. And I was also trying to play around with multiple other sentences as well, which are completely not correlated with each other. And still, from the embeddings at least, I was able to see high similarity between them. So I was wondering, should we even use these embeddings properly? I mean, is this reliable? Is some my question.
So there are two parts to that. The first is the lowest that you will probably find between any two sentences is around 0.68 or 0.69. You will not find anything lower than that. And it's an open question as to why ADA's embeddings and most models embeddings are using only a small portion of the embedding space.
Hmm, hmm.
Is it because there are other languages? No, that does not seem to be the case. Is it
Okay,
storing it? Is it keeping it aside for other concepts that we haven't discovered? We don't know yet.
okay,
And there has been some research around it that I'm not familiar enough,
okay,
but it's a reasonably known fact that they occupy only a small portion of the embedding space, and therefore the similarities tend to be 70% or higher.
okay.
Therefore, relative values are perhaps a better measure than absolute values of similarity. 70% similarity does not mean 70% similar.
Hmm,
It means
hmm.
it's among the worst in the range.
Got it.
Uh, the second thing that we need to be careful about is what constitutes similarity. Are love and hate similar or dissimilar? One way of thinking about it is to say they are about as dissimilar as can be. The other way of thinking about it is they're both emotions.
Correct. Hmm, hmm.
So the similarity that we may have in mind may be in a certain context where we say within the space of emotions. And again, therefore, relative similarity is a better measure than absolute.
Okay. Hmm, hmm, hmm. Got it. It should be like so whenever we for on the first point, so whenever we get some values, probably we need to again normalize it so that so point 0.7 is something that's not that similar, and maybe point 0.8, point 0.9 is similar.
Yes, and not based on an absolute scale either, meaning I wouldn't use 0.7 to
Okay.
0.9 always. I would simply say take max and min, because if all of them
Okay.
are
Okay.
emotions, they may range between 0.83 and 0.85 anyway.
Okay, okay, got it. Sure. And also few other questions, Anand. So did you try utilizing it? So I in some time back I did this exercise where I gave a data set, frequently used data set, cricket ODI data set. I was trying to give the URL to this particular. I took ChatGPT for this, and then I was trying to say, can you come up with some queries? Or interesting points from this? Can you summarize this whole data set into 5 or 6 bullet points, And then it indeed gave some results, and few were correct, and few were wrong. I couldn't find that particular kind of player, or the name of the player was misspelled, and the values that it was throwing out. For example, I think Sachin, it was throwing around runs around 12,000 or something, whereas the actual values were around 18,000 for the ODI score. And so the few were right, few were wrong. In this particular cases, is it like like I would say too early to start using this when it comes to real values, especially sales
Yes.
numbers?
Yeah, it is, but that is not stopping people right now. In a few years, it would be solved at a foundational model level, I'm sure, simply because if you take hallucination, it was one of the major problems with GPT-3 and arguably to a certain extent the GPT 3.5 as well. GPT-4 suffers from hallucination a lot less than these models, partly because of the better prompts, partly because of the better training that has been done. So foundational models keep improving and fixing the top problems, and over time those will vanish. Until then, people will, at least the early adopters, will need to work around it in a variety of different ways. One possibility, for example, is function calling. Rather than asking it for the answer, say, give me a program that will help me find the answer,
Okay.
or allow me to provide you with the inputs. Let me do what I do well. You do what you do well. And we'll make it an interplay, a dialogue. So you say fill in the blanks, then I say fill in the blanks. Uh, so to give an example, if we want to do data analysis, then there are two problems. First, it's hard to push all of the data given the context window into an LLM. Secondly, even if we could, it doesn't do a great job of arithmetic or statistics. On the other hand, it does do a great job of writing programs, and it does do a great job of entity extraction. So approach number one is to say, write a program that will answer this question given this schema, this table structure. And it does a pretty acceptable job of it, but not perfect. If even that is not okay, you say, here are a set of 30 functions that you can call.
Okay.
Calling only these functions, here's the question. Now call one or more of these functions to get to the answer to this question. That is a lot more reliable, closer to 99% reliability. And those are the workarounds that we are using right now.
Okay.
Over time, these workarounds will become less relevant, but because the usage and growth of Gen AI is so rapid that uh, even these workarounds have a growing industry around them.
Okay. Okay. So I also have like I was also thinking we were earlier working on autolysis. So with ChatGPT, would you resume it again, if possible?
No,
Or
because a significant chunk of that is something that uh, ChatGPT will do. However, oddly enough, what has happened is that client demand for autolysis has picked up because of ChatGPT. So we are executing it not as a product because I know that it is temporary, but as projects
okay.
because there is rapid demand.
Yeah. So, so you're Usually, I know you will have a lot of to-do list given any particular area. So, in NLP side, what are your next few tasks or to-do list that you're thinking to work on? And if you'll be interested, if someone also picks it up for you.
So, topic modeling is a hot area for me, and in particular, reversing or bidirectional embeddings is a specific area, or embedding arithmetic. Word2Vec, when Google introduced it, had this concept of, say, king is to queen is
Hmm,
as
hmm,
princess
hmm.
to something.
Correct.
And I see a need for that kind of arithmetic. For example, when clustering Gramener feedback from employees, there is one cluster which has only one thing in common, which is that it mentions the word Gramener.
Okay.
Now, what I therefore want to do is subtract the Gramener embedding from everything
Ah,
and say,
okay. Hmm, hmm, hmm,
ignore this.
hmm.
Just as you might want to subtract emotion from a class of emotions and say, now tell me, are love and hate very different from each other or very similar if you
Okay.
take out
Hmm,
emotions?
that's interesting.
So that kind of embedding arithmetic is something that I'm keen on. Now, having done that arithmetic, we'd have an embedding, but how do we convert it back to words? And it turns out that there aren't that many bidirectional encoders. There are a few, but they don't quite work well. And what that would allow us to do is answer questions like, what is the average of this bunch of words?
Okay.
Or this bunch of feedback. Even if such a feedback does not exist, it would be able to construct a feedback that is representative of that. Third, are there ways of exploring the embedding space itself for generation? For example, if I said, here is something, it's an embedding of, let's say, 500 words. Is there an embedding which has the same meaning that is shorter? In which case, I don't have to go for generation, which is a lot more CPU prone. I can just move in the embedding space somewhere nearby and find a shorter summary that captures that.
Okay. Okay.
How do stories flow in the embedding space? If I say here is, if there is a data story and we think of data stories as a sequence of one way of thinking about a data story is there is a data set. We apply a certain set of operations on it, and the flow of those operations is a story. For example, I could say the story is I went to this country first, then I went to this country, then I went to this country, now I'm finally in this country. And this is a flow through uh, countries as a space. How do stories flow in the embedding space?
Hmm, hmm,
And
hmm.
is there a theory around it? Are there patterns that by which we can recognize better stories or worse stories? So all of this, the embedding space exploration is one major area that I'm very keen to do something on. Another is systematic evaluation and application of social studies.
Okay.
What does that mean? Uh, can we how do we frame questions using LLMs, better questions using LLMs?
Okay.
How do we get LLMs to answer questions better that we would perhaps ask a human and use that for more meaningful structured data extraction? What I mean is, let's say, given an article, uh, would you say this person is leaning politically to the left or to the right? Is it possible to figure that out by answering a set of sub-questions?
Hmm, hmm,
Can I
hmm.
find out the person's psychological profile, an ocean profile, based on a set of writings? Now, this is something that specialized models have been trained on.
Okay.
But can LLMs be used for
Got it.
social studies support? Is another broad theme that I'm exploring. A third area that I'm exploring is agents. And this is a very open-ended exploration. What does it take for LLMs to interact with each other? If I
Okay.
start thinking of an LLM as an assistant or a team member, and each team member can have a different personality,
Hmm, hmm, hmm. That's
then
interesting.
by using a tool like GPT Engineer, which I have, and give it 1 line saying, write a web application to play the game of life. it splits it into four, it creates four LLMs. One saying you are a requirements agent or an analyst who will create a spec. You are a developer who will write the code.
Okay,
You are QA
got it.
who will test it. And you are a user who will inspect it or a manager who will orchestrate it or whatever. And it wrote an entire application and saved it and I ran it, it worked.
Okay.
Now I can say I want a marketing team. One person will be a copywriter, another person will be a critical editor, another
Hmm.
person will be a social media SEO optimization person, another person will extract that to create snippets for Twitter and therefore social media. So now I have a little team that is working on this. Now the copywriter and the editor will keep critiquing each other and
Hmm.
exploring.
Hmm. Hmm.
I've done this sort of a thing manually. There are several solutions at an early stage that do this in an automated way, and I'm really keen on exploring the potential of this as well. There's more, but these are three big experiments that
Great.
just were top of mind.
Yeah, but the last one looks very interesting. Pretty much, you're trying to create a organization using these LLMs.
Correct.
And yeah, I think I'll go to my last question now. So yeah, all saw the news on Gramener's acquisition. Why did we do this?
So, firstly, when we were introduced, oddly enough, the introduction to both sides was, look, here is a best kept secret.
Okay.
When they introduced Gramener to Straive, they said the same as when they described Straive to Gramener. I looked at the kind of data that they have and I was stunned.
Okay.
We struggle to get data from our clients.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is the organization that is providing the data to the organizations that are providing them data. The
Okay.
data behind Bloomberg, the data behind Elsevier's databases, the
Okay.
data behind LexisNexis databases, all of that is coming from them.
Okay.
Now, immediately my mind went to the possibility, look, why am I struggling to change the world in terms of improving decision making by looking at it from the end point, which is so fragmented? If I can embed intelligence
Hmm. Hmm.
and
Hmm.
decision making capability at the source, how powerful is that? For example, I don't know if you remember a piece of work that Joshua had once done for Azim Premji University. And we were trying to answer questions like, are certain judges more, do certain judges tend to take up more of certain kinds of cases? Let's
Okay.
say high,
Hmm. Hmm.
strong
Hmm.
crime like murder, kidnapping, etc., versus other kinds of criminal cases. Do certain judges tend to be lenient, in which case we can identify which judge to pick? Um, do they tend to have a varied opinion? Now, imagine an organization that's providing the scraped data. If they could add a metric around this, such as leniency
Hmm. Hmm.
or the speed of judgment or a dozen other metrics, now how much more power from a decision-making perspective
That's a
would
good.
the organizations have? Now, the beauty of it is that Strive's extremely complementary to Gramener.
Hmm. Hmm.
They
Hmm.
are extremely strong on the data
Great.
side, which we are not. We are extremely strong on the insight side. And said, oh shit, okay, look, I mean, I was at the point where, okay, can I join you, even if you won't take us?
Okay, that's interesting. Hmm. Okay. Okay, nice.
20% of the world's research passes through them.
Okay.
They are the organizations that publish Nature.
Okay.
They are the
Interesting.
organizations that are building all of the entire Reaxis database,
Hmm. Hmm.
the
Hmm.
chemicals database, is theirs.
Okay. Great.
Who would have known?
Okay, okay. I'm just wondering how they convinced you. So yeah, this looks yeah, very interesting to get into actually. When you get access to these, I'm just wondering if you guys build a internal LLM with all these data sets. Now you can, in fact, have a very big competitor. It will become a very big competitor now, right?
Exactly.
Mm.
I mean, if nothing else, so suddenly data has become
Hmm,
weaponized.
hmm, hmm.
So, arguably, 2, 3 years ago, this would have still made sense. But right now, it makes explosive sense.
Hmm, hmm,
Anyone who has this kind of data
hmm.
is now holding weapons of
That's true. That's true.
mass decision making.
That's true. That's true. I understand. Great, Anand. I think, yeah, I think wonderful. to see that. And yeah, I'll keep working with you as well. This looks interesting, actually. Great.